The next step is to delete all the entries in the fault memory and generate the readiness code. As the rear spoiler is automatically extended during this test, the protective cover must first be removed from the rear of the vehicle. Follow the instructions on the vehicle diagnostic tester until all the steps have been completed. The left and right exhaust flaps are then checked immediately using the final control diagnosis to see if they are working correctly. When performing this check, it is important to work quickly, as the flaps only work a few times when the engine is stationary. This is because the vacuum in the reservoir is quickly used up. After the engine has been running warm for a short amount of time, an initial visual inspection is performed to make sure that there are no leaks and to ensure that everything is correctly positioned and secure. Check all oil, fuel and coolant line connections for leaks. All parts must be dry. Ensure that the oil and coolant hoses are correctly fitted and positioned. The same must be done for the O-type clips, cable ties and hose brackets. Check the position of cables and lines, ensuring they are correctly secured and looking out for any signs of wear. Before mounting the side blades, check the rubber rings on the guide pins and replace them if they are damaged. To make it easier to install the rubber rings on the guide pins, lubricate them using a small amount of Vaseline. Check both the sleeve of the tank flap insert and the water drain hose for damage and replace if required. Next, remove the old adhesive strips and thoroughly degrease the bonding surfaces on the vehicle and on the side blade. Do not remove the protective film from the new adhesive strips until the gap for the side blade has been correctly adjusted. Pull off part of the protective film to make it easier to remove later by giving you a better grip. Check whether the earth wire is correctly attached to the fuel filler neck. Check that the adjusting nuts of the two adjusting elements move freely. Then loosely turn the adjusting nuts counterclockwise, but do not tighten them. The guide pins of the side blade must be pushed into these mounts when positioning the side blade. First, place the manual release cable in the engine compartment. Caution: when connecting the water drain hoses, make sure that the quick release coupling audibly engages and pull on it to check that it's correctly closed. Connect the electrical connector for the tank cap locking mechanism. Before tightening the two securing bolts, establish the correct gaps. When tightening the screws, turn the adjusting nuts of the adjusting elements into the bolting points on the side blade and secure. If the gaps are correct, pull off the protective film on the double-sided adhesive tape and press on the side blade firmly. Mount a new trim panel and open the fuel tank flap. Doing so allows you to check that the electrical mechanism used to open the tank flap is working correctly. Then fit the sleeve for the tank flap insert and check that all parts are fitted correctly according to the workshop manual. A small amount of lubricant will be of use during assembly. Caution: after assembling the right side blade, the water drain must be checked to ensure that it is working correctly. To do this, pour a small amount of water into the tank flap insert drain and check that the water emerges at the right location underneath. Please note, there are different versions of water drain hose for the sleeve on the tank flap insert. On version 1, the upper water drain hose is pushed into the lower water drain hose. In this instance, it must be ensured that the upper water drain hose is pushed into the lower water drain hose by at least 70 mm. The end of the lower water drain hose leads into the opening between the side member trim and the underbody trims. Make sure that the hose protrudes by approximately 20 mm at this location. On version 2, the upper and lower water drain hose are connected via a quick-release coupling. Make sure that the quick-release coupling is pushed together properly. In this instance, pull on the quick-release coupling to check that it is locked correctly. The hose must also protrude by approximately 20 mm between the side member trim and the underbody trims. On version 3, the outlet of the lower water drain hose is positioned further forward. In this instance, water flows out of the hose almost horizontally between the side member trim and the underbody. Ensure that the hose protrudes by 10 to 20 mm at this location. Ensure that the self-adhesive fastener is fitted securely. Now position and mount the manual release cable. The manual release cable is positioned up to the rear crossmember, as shown here, without any permanent fastenings. Ensure that the cable does not get jammed at any point when pulling it. The end of the manual release cable is secured to the rear crossmember below the loop using a cable tie. Do not tighten the cable tie too much, as it must be possible to pull the cable easily. A functional check of the manual release is also performed at this point. Before performing the test drive, all underbody trims and wheel housing liners must first be fitted. The significance of these components' function and the importance of correctly assembling them during engine removal has already been pointed out. At this point, we will demonstrate how to correctly assign the screws and what needs to be noted in particular. The cover for the center tunnel is secured using screws that have slightly larger heads than other screws. Different screws are installed on the noise insulation for the engine. Flange bolts must be used at these 2 points. Caution: when assembling this noise insulation, make sure that the handbrake cables do not lie in the guides to prevent them from being crushed. These screws must be installed here. Caution: install 2 shorter screws at this point. The coolant lines are located above the left-hand screw with sufficient clearance between the two. If a longer screw is used at this point, the clearance to the coolant line is not sufficient. For this reason, it is extremely important to use the correct screws. On the rear noise insulation, a metal strip is affixed along the center. Screws with spacers must be used at these points. Flange bolts must be installed at these points. And these screws must be installed at these points. The 2 air ducts are secured using special screws. Make sure that the air ducts are installed on the correct sides. Tighten all the screws to the specified torque. Please note, as was the case during engine removal, long and short assembly pins are used to assemble the wheels in order to avoid damage to the brake discs, rims and brake calipers. Next, reinstall the loudspeaker and the trims in the vehicle interior. Then, install the seat. Caution: please observe the procedure and safety information for work on pyrotechnic components. Before connecting the connector to the side airbag, the battery must be disconnected with the ignition switched on. Observe the notes for this procedure in the workshop manual. Make sure to prevent the battery terminal from unintentionally touching the cable clamp. Caution: before handling pyrotechnic components or any of their parts when working on the vehicle, you must first be electrostatically discharged. After pulling off adapter VAS 6281, immediately connect the airbag connector. The battery can then be reconnected. Observe the notes for this in the workshop manual. Reinstall the seat, check the seat functions and mount the sill panel trim. Then query the fault memory and erase the entries. Before performing the test drive, check the coolant level again when the engine is cold and correct it if required. The coolant level is set correctly if, when the engine is cold, the coolant lies at the maximum marking. Caution: you must be able to hear and feel the cap engage when closing it. A test drive is then carried out in line with the instructions in the workshop manual and the instructions in the maintenance manuals. Immediately after the test drive, check the hydraulic fluid level of the power steering when at operating temperature, which is indicated by the 80 degrees Celsius markings. In general, all fluid levels should be adjusted to the level intended for a vehicle handover. For example, the engine oil level should be in the middle of the Do Not Fill area. It is particularly important to ensure that you do not overfill. The final visual inspection is then performed. To do this, the noise covers must be removed once again from the engine and the gearbox. Then check again all the different positions to make sure that there are no leaks and to ensure that everything is correctly positioned and secure. Check all oil, fuel and coolant lines and connections for leaks. Caution: all parts must be dry. There must be no wear points. Install the underbody covers and noise insulation underneath. Fit all the trims in the engine compartment and check that the engine compartment lights are working correctly. Query the fault memory again. Then carry out the following final steps. Program the electric window lifts. Set the clock. Check the brake fluid level and top up the washer fluid. Reset the service interval display so that the oil change service is correct. Evacuate the refrigerant circuit and refill. Calibrate the reversing camera. And finally, clean the vehicle thoroughly before handing over to the customer. Caution: This film does not replace the current workshop manual and other service literature. This documentation must take priority at all times. We always want to improve our programs. Please send any suggestions, improvements and suggested topics you may have to audi.service.tv@audi.de.